Welcome to Careers Unwrapped, where we delve into real-life career stories from successful people who've been through it all, the ups and the downs. We'll get their raw, honest, actionable advice and be the careers talk they wish they'd had when they started out. As someone who has had a varied career, from soldier to salesman, expedition leader to entrepreneur, he knows firsthand that your career doesn't always lead you where you expect it to. Here's your host, Mark Fawcett.
Hello and welcome to Careers Unwrapped. I'm your host, Mark Fawcett, and with me today is David Grant. David is a primary school teacher based near Glasgow, based in Scotland, but there's much more to him than that. He's also very widely known from TikTok with his platform Organised Educator. He shares about the joys, the struggles of being a teacher. He also hosts his own podcast, Inside Voices, a teacher podcast, and he also publishes his own teaching resources. So we're going to be talking about his teaching career and hopefully giving some insights into the real life of being a busy teacher. So, David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Thanks. I think I'd start with why teaching? What was the catalyst at the beginning that made you think that's for me?
This is a really interesting one because I never actually wanted to be a teacher early on. So my story is a little bit different to most people. A lot of people get into teaching because they've wanted to do it since they were 4 or 5 years old. You know, it's always been what they wanted. But actually for me, I went to university and did 2 years of accountancy and finance and just wasn't for me. Now, the benefit of being in Scotland is we get university for free. So I told this whole story on my podcast, but essentially what happened was I ended up failing my way through it and realizing that it just wasn't my goals to be sitting behind a desk all day. That just wasn't what I wanted to do. And I had been doing a lot of youth work, like summer camps and clubs within the village that I lived in and things like that. And I loved it. And my mum and my sister were teachers. So I kind of had like an in there. But I think that's also the reason I didn't want to do it because I heard about it all the time. So essentially, yeah, it was something that was almost, I fell into it. But when I did fall into it, it was something that I found was a passion and was something that I just absolutely loved. So yeah, not the normal route into teaching, but one, well, I said this as well, that not many people have a normal route into a career. So mine has just taken a couple of different turns.
We have a thread in common there that I didn't know, in that I started at university doing accountancy.
Right.
Accountancy with computer science. So we both started accountancy. You ended up in teaching. And my first job after university was in the army. And clearly neither of us were destined to be accountants.
Yeah. To be honest, this is no hate to like accountancy, but it just wasn't for me. Like, I couldn't face it, basically.
So when you thought, okay, despite trying to avoid the family career route here, I'm going to go for this. On practical levels, what did you have to do in the Scottish education system to train and become qualified as a teacher?
Obviously, I had to get good grades to get into accountancy and finance. So you had to pretty much, and to get into Glasgow University, you pretty much had to have straight A's. And so I worked for that. So that set me up pretty well to then be able to go into whatever I wanted to do. So for example, when I left accountancy, I had offers for law. And I just spread my net pretty wide and I could have gone and done a couple of things. But then because I had done accountancy and not like a social science or something, I couldn't transfer. So I had to do the 4-year degree. So in Scotland, we do 4 years for primary teaching. Well, every degree is pretty much 4 years. I think in England, it might be slightly different at 3 years, but I'm not sure. So I had to go back and do a whole 4 years after having done 2 already, which was not the best, but it just had to be done. So when I did that 4 years, I finished and I had the option to do a master's, which I didn't do, which I could have done. But I just needed out of university at that point. Like I'd done too much. And then in Scotland, we have something different as well. We have an NQT, or newly qualified teacher year, but it is given to you. So it's called our probation year historically, and you get a paid year for work, and then you're officially qualified. So it's very different from the English system.
And you chose primary teaching, and primary education is, well, most primary teachers are women. And there are many primary schools with 0 or just 1 or 2 male teachers in it. So what was the reasoning behind you going to the younger age groups?
Essentially because it is what I'd done. So I had been into my mum's school. she used to drag us in to help with different clubs and things. So I had worked with younger children and I enjoyed that. I'm also 5'8", and like high school students, it just wouldn't be for me. But really the issue was, if I wanted to do high school, I would have to have a degree in a subject. I don't know what it is, the system is in England, I'm not sure, but in Scotland you have to have a degree and then you get in Scotland it's a postgraduate diploma, PGDE. I think it might be a PGCE. I can't remember which one's which in England or Scotland, but you would then have to get your final. So I didn't have that. So I literally could not have become a high school teacher. It just wasn't an option, you know.
And what's the school like you work in at the moment?
It's brilliant. It's a small school. We've only got about 200, 240, something like that. It's kind of like a village school, but in a town. So it's got that vibe of really tight-knit community, which is nice. There's only one class per year group. And yeah, it's just a great place to work, to be honest. I really can't complain. I've been there this is my 4th year now.
And 4 years in, looking back on your expectations when you started, what has been perhaps most different in reality from the expectations you had at the beginning?
Well, technically, this is my second school. So I think this is my 5th year in. Like I said, we get that first year. So I was in a different school for that. And then I got my final job. Expectations. I didn't expect to get as much leadership opportunities as quickly. I thought I would have quite a few years of just teaching. And then what you realize in schools is if you show a talent for anything, like if you show an interest in anything, it very quickly becomes your thing in the school. So I'm quite interested in technology. So I'm like the STEM guy. Like I was just thrust upon me. It was that kind of, well, I didn't really ask for this, but if you do start to show that really early on, they'll give you leadership opportunity. That's been my experience, and it might not be everyone's. That would be the biggest difference, I think.
There's something in there that a lot of us, myself, listeners, might recollect from our own school days, is that where you came across a teacher who had a passion point, and it might have been the teacher who just loved chess, or they liked hiking, or they liked canoeing, or musical theatre. If they had a big passion for it and the school leadership just let them run with it, then that school would just grow and grow and grow in that area and be known for it. And do you find you're able to not just be the person who's asked to fix the IT because you're the tech guy, but are you the person who's allowed to start thinking more about digital skills and inspiring the use of technology, both amongst your young students, but also amongst other teachers?
Yeah, 100%. Our management team, our leadership team are very good at giving opportunities, not just with the children, but with staff. We also have an adjoining school. So we have a denominational school and we do a lot together with them. So yeah, we have like opportunities to lead inset days. We have opportunities to go and learn from other schools. Like we this year have been to other schools to learn from them during school time. So we get time out to go and do that. And I think it's helpful because although you're passionate about something, you want to see it have an impact. You don't just want to be the guy that likes canoeing or the guy that likes golf, so he does a golf club. Like you actually want to see it embedded, and the learners then start to pick up on that as well. So that's really helpful when you get opportunities like that to go and actually build it into the curriculum, build it into the school life, which is nice.
And you've spoken before about using AI, in particular ChatGPT, and how it saves you time for things like marking papers. And I know that some parents would immediately think their jaws would hit the floor if they think that a teacher was using AI to mark their child's paper. But how actually does that help you both improve the job and save time at the same time?
So I've never actually used it to mark an assignment, because in primary school, we don't do that kind of level of work. Like I don't have them submitting essays and things. So what I really use it for in terms of my workload, and listen, it's not all the time, it's few and far between, but what I do use it for is ideas and planning. So that would be the main things. So for example, there's lots of different ones that you can get. So I can't even remember, TeachMate is one of them, and Lesson Lab and things. There's just like a million out there now that you can go on and you can put in, okay, I need a lesson for boom, boom, boom. And it'll give you ideas. They're not amazing. Like they're not foolproof. You still have to take those ideas and turn them into a lesson. You still have to deliver those ideas. But what it does do is it might take that time that you would have sat on the internet trawling through or looking through the books in the school, and it finds that information for you instantaneously, and it puts it into structure. As well, the admin tasks that it can do is just unbelievable. Like, it can write reports, which I don't use it for, but it can write like policy documents and things. So things that would just take time, it can just do it so well, so quickly.
I found myself that for certain tasks, writing a speech, writing an article, particularly, that the right use of AI, whether it's ChatGPT or Bard or something else, it can be like a creative friend on your shoulder, just throwing you some seeds to start with. And I found it saves me probably about 25% of my time that I might have spent on that. And it adds a little bit of extra thought and quality. The overall product, if you want, is mine completely, 100% at the end, but it's just sped it up. Is that how you're finding it?
Yeah, I would fully agree with that, actually, because people, when it came out, I don't know if you remember this, like, what was it, last year or 2 years ago, when it started to come out into mainstream, people just immediately recoiled and thought, this is something evil. And actually what it's doing is it's just giving you another tool to work with, like you said. So for example, when I'm using it in school, I would never allow it to overtake my workload completely. Like, I would never allow it to be everything I rely on. I just use it to influence or just to give ideas, really. The one way we use it in school, actually, the children use it quite a lot. Actually, I think they use it more than me, to be honest. But they use it in terms of Canva. I don't know if you've used Canva before. It's a design tool. And if we're ever designing anything online, like flyers or posters or whatever, then there's AI tools built in they can use, so image generators and things. And we always use it for ideas, so they never use what they generate, but then they can base the, like, inspiration, basically. There's a free one actually called CuriePod that we use, and it creates full lessons, like full PowerPoint slides and everything. It's like a gold mine, honestly. It's amazing. And if you got addicted to that, it would be too much. But then they can interact with the slides. So they log on and they type as you're going and everything. So they use it a lot as well.
And so you've got some of the younger stage students using technology that the majority of their parents probably don't use. And some of their parents are even quite fearful of. Do you find you have to create a connection or an explanation between your use of it, the students' children's use of it, and the parents' understanding of it? Or are the parents just happy for you to push on?
That's a really interesting question. We've never had any negative feedback. And what we do in the school is, we're doing it this year again, we're putting on parent events. So where the parents will come in and they'll actually work with their children, which is really interesting. I actually just had one today. And the parents come in and the kids teach the parents, which is great, because then, well, the best way to learn something is to teach it. And so the kids are learning at the same time and the parents are learning. And the amount of parents that have said to me, oh, I could use this in my job. I could use this for what I'm doing. And like Canva, like the design one, oh, we could make flyers with this for X, Y, and Z. So it's really interesting to see them start to, I mean, kids are on technology all the time. The parents probably look at their kids and think they know so much more than me already. But we've never really had any negative feedback from that, which has been good. I imagine it might come at some point, but not to this date, which has been helpful.
And now another area of technology, we touched on in the introduction, social media. You obviously are very active on TikTok with Organized Educator. Do go and check it out, everybody. And I was looking earlier this week at some of the content you put on there, particularly a day in the life piece, which involved you talking a bit about how tired you were. It involved you lying down on a desk and sort of walking off in the distance with a Breakfast Club fist sort of power salute. But in terms of portraying the real life of a teacher, what's a week like? How many hours are you putting in? How often are you engaging with parents? How's a busy week for you?
It's hard to quantify because my contract is 35. That's 35 hours is my contract. That's what I get paid for. But then you also have, I think, 30 to 40 hours that you make up on top of that within a kind of agreement that you set out at the start of the year. So that's extra things like parents' night and all your events and discos and all that stuff. You agree on what you're doing at the start of the year, basically. So there's that. But everyone knows that teachers work more than their contract. That's not a new, like if teachers walked in at 9 and left at 4, school wouldn't be a very fun place to be. So I would say most teachers will do an hour extra maybe in the morning, depending on their schedule, and then minimum maybe an hour after school. I personally have made it so that I never take work home. but that means that I just have to stay a little bit later. If people have families and things, they have to go. It's very flexible. Like, I would say it's one of the most flexible work environments out there in terms of your hours in a day, not in terms of holidays and stuff. That's quite rigid. But it is very flexible in terms of, like, I need to leave at 3:00. Okay, I need to leave. Like today, I had to leave at 3:30. And so I left at 3:30 and no one batted an eyelid at that, because in my head, I came in an hour earlier. I came in at 8. So you just get that flexibility. So a normal week, I would say people would do anywhere between 45 to maybe 60 at a push hours in the school that I'm working in. That would be quite extreme. I think the national average is around about 60 hours a week. That's people working at home, people choosing to do extra. It's a tricky question to answer, I'm not going to lie.
And when the school holidays arrive, how much work do you have to do in those, or do you manage to take a complete break?
Yeah, I like to relax. I'm not going to lie. I love to relax. No, it depends what holidays. If you're talking about the summer holidays, I'll always do 3 or 4 days towards the end of the summer holidays where I'm in school setting up my class. And again, it's that way. It's like you kind of have to. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing your tail for the first week of school. Some people don't do it. I get that. They've got family commitments and things. They've got childcare. All that stuff goes on. For me, I just need it. I need those 3 days at least. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's a week. A lot of people use their holidays for that. I don't know that it's the most healthy thing in the world, but for me, I just, like, I can't do without it.
It's quite a sort of work hard, play hard environment in a way. I mean, perhaps different from how that is sometimes meant, that term times are intense. There are a lot of hours. There's the evenings, there's the extras that you put in. And then when the holidays come along, school holidays, you're trying to take as much of a break as possible. So you've got to enjoy that sort of up and then down sort of lifestyle rather than just a gentle continuum through the whole of the year.
Yeah, I don't know what your work schedule is like or what your holidays are like, but this is kind of how it works for me. So the first week of the summer holidays is always exhaustion. Like, it's just, and you take a week, and most people only get a week. So because it's so intense up until that point, the first week is usually, and then you get your break and your holidays. You really can't complain about a teacher's holidays, but it is that first week. And then the last week is always, I need to go back to work. I need to get into work. And it's a bit, I don't know if you're probably not like that because I don't know, you don't get the school holidays. But yeah, it's a very strange sensation in the holidays.
I can imagine. And I want to try and get under the skin a little bit of what it really feels like. So let's perhaps just take the last term or the weeks that have gone so far of this term since the beginning of the year. What's been the highs during that over the last 6-7 weeks? What are the bits that made you think that was amazing? That's why I'm a teacher.
I would say January is probably the hardest. January, February is like, it's just dark mornings and it's tough. The highs are always for me the student interactions. Like, that's what you do it for. I mean, it's those moments. I know it's really cheesy, but it's those moments of the light bulb coming on or someone really struggling with something and finally like getting it. It's really, you can't quantify it. You don't know when it's going to come. You don't know if it's going to be weeks until the next time you get that moment. But for me, is the best feeling when someone just gets. So this month we've been doing fractions, decimals, and percentages, and for some people that just blows their mind. Like, the difference between the three, just, you know. And because we're so fast paced, like, you've got to get everything done. Sometimes they just don't ever get it. You know, that is it. But this month we've been seeing a lot of light bulb moments, and I love that. Another thing that I love is seeing people come out of their shell. So we do a lot of shows, we do a lot of clubs, and to see people, I remember a couple of years ago, my football team, I run the football team in the school, and it was the cool kids, you know, the cool guys who were in the football team. And by the end of the year, every single one of them was singing a solo in the school show at the end of the year, in their like end of school show. And they were amazing singers. Like, the boys were just fantastic. And that for me was a moment, because it was like, they would never have done that if someone hadn't pushed them to believe in themselves that they could do it. And I love those moments. Like, see people come out of their shell. That is just, you can't explain it. And you feel like you've had an impact as well.
I mean, I've been very lucky in my work for many, the last 30 years or so, to have worked very close with teachers and with schools. And what you say there resonates with a feeling that others express to me. I also, a long time ago, used to lead youth expeditions overseas in mountains and jungles and places like that. And there would always be many points in that, but individual ones for each person, where they would come out of a shell, or they would conquer a fear, or they would just nail a skill that they had been trying to pick up. And it's incredibly rewarding. Just going to the flip side of the joys of the light bulb moments and student interaction, what are the moments that maybe make you question, or not that bad, maybe just think that was an awful day? What are the things that are also real part for teaching?
There's lots of things that teachers complain about but are tough. There's a lot of things that about the job are tough. You don't want to sugarcoat to anyone. If anyone was wanting to come into teaching, you wouldn't want to say, oh, it's all, rainbows and sunshine. I think the thing that not gets me down the most, but it's just allowing things to pile up. I've got myself to blame. Like, I know these things are coming up. I know that next week I've got report cards due. I know that next week I've got this survey to do with the children and I've just forgotten to do it. It's those things that pile up. And then you think, oh, I feel a little bit overwhelmed here with all of the other stuff, rather than just, I thought teaching was just going to be me in a classroom, me in a class full of kids, and that was going to be it. That is not the truth. Like, that is not what teaching is. I would say that's like 40% of your job. The rest is just everything that goes into building those moments. So I think for me personally, the things that are the lows are letting myself get snowed under a little bit. Also, when you feel like you're not making an impact, that opposite side of the coin, when someone isn't getting it, when you feel like you're just, banging your head against a brick wall constantly. I've tried to explain this to someone 4, 5, 6 different ways. I'm out of ways of explaining it and they still don't get it. And they feel that that's a wee bit, or a little bit defeatist. Sometimes you think, am I a bad teacher because they don't get it? That's not the case. But it can feel like it's on you if they don't get it. So there's two sides to that coin. It's the best feeling when they get it. It's the worst feeling when they don't.
Well, there'll be a proportion of adults who might be listening to this thinking, I've still never got fractions either. And whether that was down to their teacher at the time or themselves, who knows? But many of us will have a recollection of a teacher in a positive sense from when we were younger, someone who inspired or just maybe even gave us the kick that was metaphorically needed at the time. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what have you seen that makes the difference between being a good teacher and being a great teacher? What's that extra percentage that you think, wow, that's inspiring?
The extra percent is building good relationships and showing that you care about that child. So I've now taught for 5 years, and I could see that if I was 20 years down the line, it's another class, it's the same routine, just another bunch of kids. And you see them every day. You do the same things as you did last year. And actually what you need to do every year is you need to reset, and you need to realize this is 30 individuals that are here for an experience with you, and everything that you do matters. So the extra 10%, the extra little push that makes you a great teacher, I'm not saying I am, but the teachers that I've experienced that are great teachers are the ones that go over and above for the children in their class by building good relationships with them, interested in what they do. What did you do at the weekend? Asking them and remembering about their lives, thinking about their wider achievements outside of school. You got a black belt in karate, or you got, well, black belt's maybe a bit high, but that kind of thing really makes a difference for children and helps them buy in to their education if they see that they've got someone that cares. And it's such a simple thing to do, but sometimes as a teacher you get lost in the woods a little bit. You just kind of, I need to get the curriculum, I need to get this done, I've got all these deadlines to meet, we've got exams, we've got essays due. The things that matter to the children are probably the interactions you have with them on a daily basis. I mean, even if I asked you, you could probably remember a teacher or two that you had that you probably don't remember much that they taught you, but you probably remember, maybe it's cheesy again, but how they made you feel in class, or something that they did for you, or even a joke that you had, like an in-joke with them. Or, I mean, I'm even thinking of 2 or 3 just now from primary and high school that gave me that feeling.
Yeah, definitely. There are, I think, 3 or 4 teachers who I can picture now and sort of think about the moods or the conversations rather than necessarily what I learned. As one teacher, I can also remember for negative reasons, but that's quite a small number of teachers of all of the teachers I would have met that have stuck with me many years later. You mentioned about resetting, and you obviously taught through the COVID times, through the lockdowns. How have your pupils, have your school managed to reset after that experience? And what has the impact actually been on the young people who you teach?
Oh, it was awful. Like, the whole experience was just, I would never go back to that. I mean, that was my first year teaching. So it was a strange first year. I was in the class 6 months, or maybe even less than that. What was it, February or something? March, we locked down. And then I had the rest of the year at home. And the school I was in at that time, it was much more about health and well-being. It was much more about checking in on the students and seeing if they were okay. And it was an awful experience. And then equally as bad was what happened when we came back, which was the hybrid. Everyone had to be socially distanced, the winter lockdown. I mean, the whole thing was just dreadful, necessary, but dreadful. And the impact, so academically, the school that I'm in hasn't seen as big an impact as other schools. Probably down to parents, home learning, that kind of thing. It was very well engaged with. And so academically, I think nationally they claim that it's only like 3 months behind or something. I think that's a farce. I don't think that's accurate. But in our school, we're back on track. There's probably gaps in their learning, no doubt. I mean, I'm finding that in my class. I'll say, oh, you learnt this. And then I have to be like, no, they actually didn't. They weren't even in school at that point. So then I noticed that there's gaps mainly in general knowledge. Like, that's what I'm noticing. But the biggest impact, I would have to say, at the coalface is social impact, learning how to deal with people and relationships. That's been we're seeing it come through now. We're seeing so the children that were in, well, we have primary 1, primary 2, are early years of school. So year 1, year 2, year 3. We're seeing now that they're all coming through, and you can track in your mind what you would expect a year 6 or a year 7 to behave like. And it's different now in a lot of ways, even just in the way that a lot of children deal with social situations and interactions. It's really interesting to see how that's changed. I don't know why. Are
there specific either policies or approaches or strategies being adopted in your school that are now different from what they were before because of that impact on social engagement amongst the young students?
100%. We've fully switched now to a nurture approach, which is much more of a restorative approach to behaviour rather than punitive. So in terms of the day-to-day in the classroom, what that means is I wouldn't have a behaviour chart on the wall. I don't have names. I mean, that would be quite archaic now. You wouldn't see that in many schools. And it's much more restorative. There's good points and bad points that I'm not here to debate which one I prefer, because it's just the way it is. You know, I've got to do what the school does. So yeah, there's policies that are coming through from government level. There's policies that are coming through from council level, like local government, and even just individual schools. So I would say, yeah, it's definitely had an impact in terms of social. I mean, we even have we have different initiatives, I would say, maybe not policies, but initiatives in the school now. Much more of a drive for health and well-being rather than fully curriculum based. Like, for example, we have to take the children outside to do outside learning. I would say double the amount than we did before, at least. So that's a full shift from what you were doing before. And even just things like that just changes a day-to-day life completely.
So you've been in teaching now for 5 years, 2 schools. You talk about it through, well, to me now, but also through your TikTok platform as well. So I'm interested to know, considering a lot of the people who listen to this are people who are starting on a career. They may be pre-career, still at college. They may actually be in a first or second job. But if you could go back in time 5, 6, 7 years to your younger self, what advice would you give to yourself with the hindsight you've got now about things to do better, things not to do, things to do faster? If you could go back and say, I've got 3 bits of advice I want to give to young David, what might they be?
Number 1 would be, don't worry, it will get done. The work will always be there. And so your to-do list will never, ever be done. And that's just work life. And I always wanted it wiped clean. I wanted a fresh slate every day. Just be okay with some tasks still being there at the end of the day. You've got some things that will take a couple of weeks and you'll get to it. So the work will get done, and don't stress about it. easier said than done. I would also say make sure you work on relationships with staff. I think that's really important. Not just teachers, management, leadership, the school janitor, classroom assistants or teaching assistants. Every member of staff in the school plays a role. And I think as teachers, sometimes we can just isolate ourselves. And especially as a young teacher, you feel like you're there to work and you feel like you're there to be a teacher and you just keep your head down, but actually you've got to build relationships with people. Maybe not even just with staff. Like, see if you go to an inset day or a different school or I would say I've done all right with this, but people are the core of teaching. And if you don't have good relationships across the council or across different schools, it can be quite an isolating job. And you need to feel like you've got people that support you, have got your back there. A third piece of advice. I would probably say the same thing, but about the children. So make sure you are taking time not just to focus on curriculum. Really important that you get through the curriculum. Like, don't get me wrong, that is your job. But children will give you more if you give a little bit to them. So I feel like I've done okay with this. Again, I could probably do a little bit more of engaging with them on a personal human level rather than just, I'm your teacher and I'm the authority in the classroom and you will listen to what I say and you will do what I ask. Actually what you're wanting there is relationships, because then they will do what you ask. I think that's the 3 pieces I would give.
Linked to that, if I was starting out and thinking about teaching, what are the questions I should ask myself? What are the things I should say, this is what I need to think about in order to make my own decision about whether teaching's right for me?
You'd probably want to ask yourself if you're okay with the salary. First of all, just being honest, like, you have to look at that and weigh that up, obviously. You could earn a lot more money in the private sector. That's just the way it is. You'd have to do a different job, but you probably have to ask yourself if you are passionate about it, because there'll be days where you want to quit. There'll be days where it really gets you down and it can be a tough job. But the days that is like that, your underlying passion and love for the job gets you through. You also probably want to ask yourself if you've got the energy for it. It's like, as a full-on job, like, you're on your feet most of the day. You're working with children that are energetic. You have to give them a lot of energy. It is a tiring job. And if anyone was wanting to get into teaching, I'd probably ask them why. What is your reason? And if it was like, oh, I love the holidays, you probably think, I don't know if it's worth it just for the holidays. I don't know if that is. Yeah, so I would probably ask you, what is it you love about the idea of teaching? Has it been inspirational? Has it seen a difference in people's life? Is it having an impact in your local community, making a change, helping other people, that kind of thing?
I think, Dave, what you've given us in this conversation is almost like the door to the staff room has been opened a little bit for the outsiders to peer in, because you've been clear about some of the realities. You've mentioned there in the end about the salary. You've mentioned about needing the energy. You've mentioned about being passionate, because some days are tough. And you've also, through the conversation, inferred about the work-life balance and, some of the impacts you're dealing with still post-COVID from in there. But actually what really shines through for me is what you were saying about those light bulb moments, the student interaction, and the pieces where you just know, and teaching is one of the few jobs that can do this, where you just know that at that moment in time, you have made a difference to another human's life. And so that, I think, it's inspiring. The role of teachers and teaching is perhaps not as celebrated and respected as it may have been decades ago, but the high points and the difference and the positivity that teachers make when they just get it right and the students get it right and the relationships are strong are incredible. As I said earlier, I've been lucky to work in around education for many years and have seen so many examples of that. So, David, thank you so much for opening that door to the staff room for us. I've got one final question. You're dealing with students and pupils all the time, and you're seeing both the careers, although they're still very young, both the jobs that they might talk about, but also the jobs they have absolutely no knowledge of at all. What types of roles or jobs do you think we need to get on and explore?
A lot of people go into tech-based jobs nowadays. But actually that sounds like when someone says, oh, work in technology or work in STEM or work in tech or work in IT might be what you hear normally. I mean, that can sound quite dull and boring, but actually some of the things that these people do is incredible. So the things that I'm interested in, like the one person that I would love to just sit and pick their brains on was a person that came into our school, and it was a STEM careers thing. And they did a talk about, it's fascinating, they designed prosthetic like organs for people. But the level of detail that he went into, I think it was like a gullet he had made for someone or something like that. I mean, there's all these people out there that are in IT or in tech related jobs that you just don't associate with IT. You just think someone in IT is just sitting behind a desk and doing coding all day or fixing the company laptops, you know. But actually there's just like all these design folk out there. I would love to pick their brains and see how they got into that career.
I think it's fascinating peeling back the lid of tech and going deeper and deeper into what people are doing, that of course someone has to have a job doing it, but perhaps you don't think how it gets done and therefore who is behind that. So we shall dig into that a little more.
The people behind artificial intelligence, if I could sit down with them and talk about it, I'd be really interested in that.
Brilliant. David, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for being a guest on Careers Unwrapped. It's been wonderful to meet you.
Oh, it's been brilliant. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is sponsored by We Are Futures. To find out more about We Are Futures and how we can introduce your brand, business or organisation to the mass markets of tomorrow, visit www.wearefutures.com. Make sure to search for Careers Unwrapped in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Remember to click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at We Are Futures, thanks for listening.